They must be breathing a sigh of relief over in number 10 this morning. The government's off the front pages, thanks to the artist formerly known as the Duke of York. The King is heading for Rome to pray with the Pope. Presumably, it's the only way he'll get some peace this week. And just to reassure you, this programme is not giving up its title. Prince Andrew may be hoping for a quiet life from here on in. Not a chance. The West Midlands police, too, might have thought that no one would notice when they banned Israeli fans from Villa Park. They couldn't have been more wrong. Massive own goal. And if the Chancellor imagines that everyone's going to forget there's a budget coming, she should keep watching. We're on it. Football bans, China, the economy, and this morning, green jobs. There are a lot of spinning plates for the government. Which, if any, will break? Energy Secretary Ed Miliband is here shortly. And we'll get reaction from his Conservative shadow and the woman formerly tasked with reaching net zero, Claire Coutinho. And he is the Russian billionaire turned Putin foe. Mikhail Khodorkovsky tells this programme that he believes Moscow is close to a deal over Ukraine and warns that our Foreign Office no longer has the expertise to tackle the Kremlin. Plus, with us throughout the show, the Wall Street Journal's editor-at-large, Gerard Baker, the journalist and broadcaster, Carolyn Quinn, and associate editor at the Financial Times, Stephen Bush. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. It's been a week of deal-making behind closed doors. But it seems that the more we legislate for openness in government, the less we know. Even where we think the deal's been done, it's been hard to tell who decided what, when, or why. Many questions still hang in the air about the deal between the King and the brother, formerly known as the Earl of Inverness, Baron Killyleagh, and yes, the Duke of York. Or about the one between Trump and Netanyahu on Gaza. Or about the other one between Trump and Zelensky on missiles. Not to mention the other one between Trump and Putin on whatever they discussed in a 2.5-hour phone call on Friday. And who knows whether some people have been spying for China or not. And if they have, whether it was ministers, advisors, prosecutors or police who decided that they should have been clapped in irons and disappeared into the Tower of London. In fact, they didn't decide that. Nobody's quite sure who was in on the banning of Israeli football fans, never mind why. It all calls to mind the lyric from the hit musical Hamilton. No one really knows how the parties get to yes, the pieces that are sacrificed in every game of chess. We just assume that it happens, but no one else is in the room where it happens. Over the next 90 minutes, stick with us and we'll do our best to open the door a crack, look inside the room, and as Hamilton almost says, see how the game is played, the art of the trade, how the political sausage gets made. Let's tuck in, shall we? Let's talk to the Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband. Ed Miliband, the family of Virginia Giuffre has said that the fact that Prince Andrew has voluntarily chosen not to use his titles is vindication. But does the government have any plans to legislate to remove the title so that Parliament has its opportunity to show disapproval of the Prince's actions?
I think in this we're going to be guided by the palace and the royal family, Trevor, and obviously, you know, all of our sympathies and the sympathies of your viewers at this time will be with Virginia Giuffre and her family and as to these really concerning set of issues. But I think it's really important as a government minister that I allow and that we allow the royal family to make its decisions on these questions. Prince Andrew has given up these titles by agreement with His Majesty the King, and I think that's that's obviously the position.
All right, let's turn to the football. The Prime Minister, leader of the opposition, Sir Ed Davey, Nigel Farage, all say it's wrong that the fans of the Israeli club Maccabi Tel Aviv should be banned from attending a match in Birmingham. Why this morning does the ban still stand?
Well, look, we are working with the relevant authorities on this issue. I think the principle here, Trevor, is we do not want a situation where people of a particular faith or from a particular country can't come to a football match because of their faith, because of where they're coming from. And so the best outcome that we can, and the outcome we want to see is that this match goes ahead as normal with all of the fans there. This was obviously an operational concern that the police had. I think it's important to proceed sensitively here. We're working with the police and the relevant authorities to ensure the match can go ahead with all the fans from both teams attending.
But, well, there are two questions here. First of all, has anybody in government actually considered whether this is legal? Because looking back to a previous existence of mine, I suspect that banning Israeli fan or the fans of an Israeli club might be unlawful under the Equality Act because it applies a condition to a particular group of people.
Well, look, I'm not sort of, I don't know about that question, but I think the question really for us is to make sure that the match can go ahead with all of the fans there.
All right.
And that's what we're working towards. I think, you know, from across the political spectrum, people said it was not the right decision. But we've got to understand the police make operational decisions about matters. We now are working with them, with the local authorities and others.
And the question that I think many people will be asking is, maybe there may be operational decisions, there might be resources, but there is a major matter of principle here, which everybody agrees. You guys are the government.
Yes.
Police are answerable to the government. Why hasn't it been decided that whatever it takes, the principle of equality and freedom should be the thing that matters most here?
Well, I am saying that's the principle that matters.
So what you're telling me is that come what may, Maccabi Tel Aviv fans will
I'm not going to say come what may, but I'm giving you a very, very clear indication of what we are working towards, which is that, you know, the fans from both teams can attend the match.
OK, well, let me just put it this way. Who does everybody think is at risk here? Is it the Tel Aviv Maccabi fans, or Maccabi Tel Aviv fans, or is it the people in Birmingham who are at risk from those fans? How's this been explained?
Well, look, my understanding, as I understand it, the police make these decisions about, you know, could there be public safety issues associated with a match? And that's the basis of the decision. I think we saw some issues at an
IAX. We live in a police state. You guys are in charge. Why aren't you telling the police whatever they need to do, they must do?
I think we're saying very clearly, Trevor, that we want, as I've said a number of times, the match to go ahead with all of the fans attending. I think in any of these questions of public safety, football matches, and after all, you know, there's kind of, you know, this isn't the first football match where, you know, issues have been raised. You've got to work with the relevant local authorities, the police authorities, to find a way forward, and that's what we're going to do.
All right, look, there's another separate piece to this puzzle. The petition that was launched by the local MP, Ayub Khan, independent MP, to have the match banned or moved to another country was signed by 3,987 individuals. The petition says, I'm quoting here, "This is not a normal match." And one reason that's given is that the Maccabi fans are arriving in, I'm quoting again, Aston, a diverse and predominantly Muslim community. Is Aston now a no-go area for Jews?
No, and it can't be. And I'm very, very clear about that. And look, I believe we as a country pride ourselves on our diversity, but also our tolerance and our hatred of prejudice, frankly. And so, you know, we cannot have a situation where any area is a no-go area for people of a particular religion or from a particular country. And we've got to stamp out all forms of prejudice, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, wherever we find them.
Well, this Member of Parliament gets together a petition, 4,000 odd people sign it, and as far as one can make out, at this moment, whatever you're working towards, at this moment, he has created a situation where whatever it would be, 10,000 or 1,000 or 10,000 Israeli fans cannot come into this area. And he is specific that part of the reason is that this is a predominantly Muslim community.
Well, look, I profoundly...
Is he in any way justified?
No. I profoundly disagree with that approach, with what is being said in that petition, because that cannot be the basis on which our country operates. And look, I actually think for the vast majority of people and the vast majority of places in our country, it isn't the way we operate. So let's not sort of take one petition and say it paints a picture of our country. I don't think it is the fair picture of our country.
Well, he won an election on this. We've heard recently Robert Jenrick on his views on Handsworth as essentially a community which is
he said there weren't white people, as I understand it.
Yeah, but what I think Jenrick was trying to say was that this was a community which in some ways is segregated, has its own values. And the reason I'm asking you about this MP, this is who they voted for in this area, and he is saying, in terms, that the problem here is that this is a Muslim community and this team and its fans are in some way alien.
The vast majority of Muslim people in this country would disassociate themselves from those remarks, frankly, Trevor. And look, integration is, as you know, but as well as I do, because of your work on these questions, integration is not something you can ever take for granted, and it's something you always have to keep working on. But, I do think there's something important here, which is not to talk down our country or suggest that somehow our country, to paint a picture of it which is so far from the truth. That's not the way I think about Britain.
OK. As a person of Jewish heritage, do you detect a whiff of anti-Semitism here?
I don't know about this petition. I think we've always got to be vigilant against anti-Semitism, and I think the reason why Keir Starmer and others were right to call this out is we can never have a situation where people, because they happen to support an Israeli team, and obviously, many of them be Jewish, many of the fans will be Jewish, somehow, are kind of barred from coming to the UK or barred from supporting their team. And vigilance against anti-Semitism, so, the tragic events in Manchester that we saw, we have to redouble our efforts against all forms of prejudice and all forms of hatred.
Well, let me put it another way. So, there are lots of football teams in from different countries who have been in some kind of ruck or another, hooligans. And a lot of our own football teams, including the one I myself support, have a history of this. Do you think that the particular issue that has been raised about this team and this match is in any way rooted in anti-Semitism?
Well, I don't know about who the question of who's raising it. I mean, I definitely don't think that's the police are simply trying to ensure, the police's concern will be around public order and public safety. I'm sure that's what the local authority concern is. But I think what we can't do, and this is why it's important to do everything we can to make sure the match can go ahead with fans of all teams, is make any set of people from any race, from any religion, from any ethnic background feel unwelcome in Britain. That is not the principle that I believe in. It's not the principle you believe in or the British people believe in.
All right, let's talk about your particular area of responsibility. You've announced this morning that you've got a big plan for green jobs. Last June, the then Shadow Chancellor said that there would be 650,000 new green jobs created partly by the National Wealth Fund. Is in your manifesto. This morning, you're promising 400,000 new green jobs by 2030. What happened to the other 250,000?
This is about clean energy specifically. If you look at net zero as a whole, then the promise stands. And what's so exciting about what we're unveiling this morning is so many people in our country, Trevor, have been asking this question for a long time, which is, where are the good jobs of the future going to come from? What's the job my son or daughter can do in the future? This is the answer. Clean energy jobs, working on nuclear power stations, working on offshore wind, working on carbon capture. And this goes to the heart of what I think this government's mission is, which is to change our economy so it doesn't just work for the wealthiest in our society, but it works for everybody, and answers these fundamental questions people have about Britain and the good jobs at good wages that people want to see.
All right, well, let's unpack some of that.
Yeah.
You're promising all these jobs, but you're starting by closing 2 refineries, Grangemouth and Lindsay Oil, that your union friends, who get a big shout-out in your announcement today, say could be retooled to produce green fuel. Isn't that self-defeating?
On Grangemouth, that closed because of decisions that were made by the company, and on the most recent refinery, Prax, we are still working to find a future for that site. But let me make
So Grangemouth could be open, but it will just presumably it'll just be a port.
What I'm saying about the
fuel.
Lindsay Oil refinery, and look, when anyone loses their job, it's a tragedy. Is that this is to do with two different private owners who made these decisions on the refinery. But as far as Prax, the most recent one, is concerned, we are doing everything we can to find a future for that site. But I think there's a sort of bigger picture here, which is we do need to create these jobs that can answer the question that people have about our energy sector. Where are these energy sector jobs going to come from? And we want to do as much as we can to preserve jobs in oil and gas and elsewhere, and we want to create these jobs of the future as well.
Jobs for whom? Many of these jobs are that you've cited, and you specifically say in your release that they are plumbers, electricians, and so on. They are what's called shortage occupations. They are tending to be filled these days by immigrant workers. Now, what are you going to do? Are you going to take those occupations off the shortage list so they have to be filled by British workers? Why would an employer choose a newly trained, even if you manage to get them through in the next year, electrician or plumber, when he or she could get an experienced worker from abroad, probably at lower rates?
What we're going to do is we're going to train up people in this country. Look, we're also unveiling today, as part of this plan, 5 new clean energy technical excellence colleges, training 20,000 people over the coming years to fill these jobs. And, I actually think I'm much more optimistic than your question implies.
Well, it's not a matter of being optimistic, it's a matter of being realistic. Why would an employer pay for a newly qualified and inexperienced worker who's probably going to be more expensive when he or she could get somebody from abroad?
Well, hang on. There are lots of people in Britain who want to do
Unless
this work.
Unless you're going to stop them doing that.
There are lots of people in Britain who want to do this. The question of shortage occupations is a narrowly circumscribed set of things, but there's lots of people in Britain...
but the jobs you've talked about are all on that list.
There's lots of people in Britain who want to do these jobs, who are looking...
Well, why aren't they doing them now?
Who are looking for these... Well, because the jobs haven't been created yet. I mean, look, this is because of a Labour government that these jobs are happening, Trevor.
Okay.
It's because of our... Let me make the point.
Why don't you just tell me that, as Gordon Brown once said, these are going to be British jobs for British workers?
We absolutely are going to do everything we can to make sure that these jobs go to workers from Britain. Now, of course, you have exceptions where you have specific things that can't be filled, where people come from abroad, but the absolute intention, the absolute motivation here, and look...
But I don't understand how you're going to compel employers to employ people who are more expensive and less experienced.
I don't accept that it's going to be more expensive. And look, it's not about compelling people, Trevor. Look, at the moment, there are 400,000 of these clean energy jobs in the economy. As a result of our plans on nuclear, on wind, on carbon capture, we're going to be expanding their jobs. And I actually disagree with you that somehow there aren't people in Britain wanting to do these jobs. There are people in Britain.
I'm not saying that.
And nor do I think that most employers necessarily want to bring in foreign labour. They want the British people who can do these jobs, and we're going to make sure that they're there.
One other element of this plan is that these are all largely infrastructure jobs, building infrastructure. One of the issues that's been raised, of course, is China's involvement in our infrastructure. You shut the Chinese out of the Sizewell site, essentially. Are you going to put the renewables strategy in Chinese hands, wind turbines, all of that? Or are they going to be...
We want to build
shut
our
out?
own domestic supply chains. Look, the point here is we haven't built enough in Britain for a very, very long time. And when you look across the country at what's happening, the Isle of Wight onshore wind blade factory, the Siemens factory producing offshore wind turbines, a new cable factory in Scotland. What you're seeing springing up across Britain, town by town, city by city, is us building our own supply chain.
They build the largest number of wind turbines, most advanced wind turbines in China. There are some built in Denmark. Are you going to have a British preference for the manufacture of these kinds of infrastructure projects?
I think we absolutely want a British preference. Yes. Look, the important thing about this government is that we've changed the attitude of the past. The attitude of the past was we don't care where any of this is made for security reasons, but also because it's about our economy and how we create the economy of the future. We want this. We want this stuff made in Britain. This is what our whole strategy, the investments we're making, is all about.
Okay. Last question, which is a personal question. Are you looking forward to debating the local boy Jeremy Clarkson when he contests your Doncaster seat at the next election?
I think he's a sort of long-standing aspirant to my seat. I think he said in 2013 that he was going to contest my seat. So look, it's for other people to decide if they want to stand for Parliament, including in my seat. I welcome all comers. You know, let's see what happens.
Okay, I'll look forward to covering that one. Ed Miliband, thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks.
Well, let's see what today's terrific trio made of that. We're joined all morning by the Wall Street Journal's editor-at-large, Gerard Baker, the journalist and broadcaster, Carolyn Quinn, and the associate editor at the Financial Times, Stephen Bush. Carolyn, I think he pretty much confirmed that the government is going to do whatever it can to overturn this decision about Villa Park. Are they right?
Well, it seems that they've taken quite a long time over this, and why hasn't something happened already, which is a question that you asked him. I'm not clear exactly who is at risk here, or who is considered to be at risk. Are they saying that the Maccabi fans are the ones who rioted in Tel Aviv, so that's why they can't be allowed here? The police say it's about public order, public safety, but this seems very murky, doesn't it, Trevor? And I think we still don't know exactly what was behind the decision. You raised the question of the petition and whether there is now a no-go area for non-Muslims in Aston. And I think Ed Miliband and others in government are having to consider that very question as they weigh up how they push for a reversal of this. But if it was going to be reversed, surely it would have been done by now. Why is it taking so long?
Well, I think that we've heard both versions of both answers to your question, that the people of Birmingham need to be protected against these football hooligans, and that Israelis coming to Birmingham might find themselves not welcome. What do you make of it, Stephen?
Well, what we saw in Amsterdam is the answer was it was both, right? You had a problem of organised attacks against Maccabi Tel Aviv fans, and that was arranged on WhatsApp. You had people saying they were going on a Jew hunt, right? And the majority of people arrested in those clashes, 50 of the 60 arrests, were people from Amsterdam in Amsterdam. But there were arrests of 10 fans. So one of the reasons why the police are giving both answers is both are true. Now, banning away fans is part of the policing toolkit. PSG did it last year against PSV Eindhoven, and in Villa Park itself, Legia Warsaw fans weren't invited, were told they couldn't attend at very last minute by the West Midlands police. But it's worth noting that a particularly spicy derby like Cardiff-Swansea, for example, you see a huge surge of police from around the country in order to enforce that. It's something they have a lot of experience at doing. And I think this exposes a broader problem with this government, which is that they don't really have much of if they do have a plan to how to improve policing in this country, they've kept it well hidden. And this is now blown up in their faces in an embarrassing and difficult way.
Jared, what did it look like from abroad?
Well, I should also say I'm a Coventry City fan, so any time people get turned away from Villa Park
private grief. I mean,
top of the Championship, the only team in the country that is actually unbeaten, Trevor, as I'm sure you well know. But I think that when you focused with him very hard on this question of whether or not it's a no-go zone and the reaction of the community and the petition and all of that, I think you did get at the core issue here, which I think does worry, whatever the specifics of the decision to, and I understand the police may have been were obviously concerned about public order, but it did look again a little bit like the police acting at the behest of a particular community, in a way to sort of appease that community, because, the unfortunate thing is, again, whatever one may think about the behaviour of Maccabi Tel Aviv fans, we've seen, that this particular member of parliament and that particular leaders of that particular community have form on this topic of Israel. And I think it did look as though the police were somehow kind of, again, it was reminiscent to some extent of the grooming gang, the so-called grooming gang scandal, of the rape gang scandal. That there are sensitivities about particular communities that the police, instead of actually enforcing the law, especially enforcing the law in a neutral and objective and fair way, seem to be kind of particularly minded to take a position that protects against or is fearful of offending against the sensitivities of a particular community. That isn't the way policing should work. I mean, policing should work in a way, of course, they've got to be concerned about public order, but they've also got to be concerned about, they've primarily got to be concerned about the law and enabling the safe passage of people to go about doing things that they want to do. So I think that raises again this question of whether there are no-go areas, whether they're for Jews in this country or indeed for other types of people. And I think that is something that will, I'm sure the government is particularly concerned about and wants to dispel by presumably getting this ban overturned.
And is it that the majority of those fans are being tainted by the actions of a few? As Stephen said, the numbers of arrests in Amsterdam were small, but fans of both sides riot. We've seen that over time with so many football matches. So, what is behind the decision here, and can the government do something about it? Can they step in to overturn a local decision? That is a big question.
Picking up on that point with you, Stephen, actually, I wonder if there's an element here of a conversation that's going on which might baffle the person on the street, as it were. This is meant to be, taking up Jerry's point, the area, the Aston ward, is about 92% non-white. Majority of the people in that group are Pakistani or Bangladeshi heritage. But it struck me that only 4,000 people signed this petition, which is frankly not a lot these days. And on the other side, the fans from Israel, I'd be very surprised if very many of them would have been involved in much mayhem. And that actually what's happening now is that small minorities are having some sort of argument, and majority are not really part of it, but suffering from it.
Well, we saw that in football in this country in the 1980s, right, where there was the vast majority of football fans were not violent, but hooliganism, came very close to killing our national game. Led to the banning of away fans from Luton Town for 5 years? The banning of all English clubs from Europe for again a prolonged period. So this has always been a particular problem in football, and of course there's always been a particular problem with religious sectarianism in football. We don't think anymore of Villa Birmingham as a Catholic Protestant derby. That used to be how it was seen. And there is, and I think we are seeing that familiar pattern of minorities threatening violence within a minority being, seen to speak for the whole of the community. Because I say it's not a very large number of people that have signed this petition, many of whom will not have been will have, feel deeply about the Israel-Palestine conflict, but were not intending to cause public order offensives. But, there is also a reasonable debate to be had if you are a taxpayer, whether in the United Kingdom as a whole or in the West Midlands, about whether or not what you want is for your marginal policing, your extra policing spend in your precept to be spent on policing the safe transit of away fans, or you want it to be done on anything else the police do. As a football fan, I want it to be on policing the safe transit of away fans. But I do think it's reasonable to note that Birmingham City Council does want that money to spend on other things than the police could be doing.
It is quite striking, of course, so just to wrap on this, though, that we are in a situation where all political leaders agree about something, but they seemingly can't do anything about it.
Yes, I mean that sums up the whole, in many ways, the challenges that governments face these days, right? Or political parties face. They don't really have the authority. In this case, we will see whether they have the legal authority. I assume somehow they do. Ultimately, I can't believe that this won't be resolved. But yeah, that does point to a problem that increasingly the ability of government to get things done, whether it's on the economic field, on the social field, or just a simple matter of policing a football match, that does seem to be beyond their capabilities.
Well, Carolyn, you're probably the best student of government speak amongst us. When ministers say they're working towards something, what are we supposed to understand by that, do you think?
Does it mean panic behind the scenes? It means that heads are being knocked together? Who knows? It seems that there is several departments involved in this, so high-profile talks are going on behind the scenes. But it does seem to suggest the time that it's taking that they don't really know how to solve this. Do they step in? They're very worried about language, and obviously, particularly after what happened in Manchester, the fears that anything can be perceived as anti-Semitism now means that the government wants to act on it instantly.
And by the way, did it strike you as surprising as it did me? It's the Prime Minister who's coming on this rather than the...
Can I just say, I do think it's kind of ironic that the government seems to be anxious to appease China at all costs, as we seem to be learning, but not so anxious to appease Israel or the fans of, or unable to appease Israel or the fans of an Israeli football team, while it is appeasing apparently the Chinese government in doing what it wants.
Well,
to do.
I think it's probably that the Prime Minister doesn't have quite enough on his plate at the moment, so he wants to get involved in this as well.
All right. It is just after 9 o'clock. You're watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. In the last hour, the Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband, has insisted that Aston is not a no-go area for Jewish people and strongly signalled that the government will overturn the ban on Maccabi Tel Aviv fans attending the Aston Villa match. He also told this programme that Parliament would be guided by the palace over whether to formally strip Prince Andrew of his titles. Well, there's a lot more to come this morning. We've heard extensively from Ed Miliband already this morning. His Conservative shadow, Claire Coutinho, gets her turn in a moment. Plus, we'll hear from a man the Kremlin accuses of plotting a coup. Our interview with Mikhail Khodorkovsky, one of the most prominent Russian opponents of Vladimir Putin, is later this hour. I should add, because lots of you ask about this, that we did invite Reform UK for an interview this morning, not for the first time. So once again, apparently, nobody was available. So let's move on to let's call it the official opposition instead. Claire Coutinho was in Ed Miliband's role this time 2 years ago. Part of her job then was to set the trajectory to meet net zero, a policy about which her party now seems lukewarm at best. Well, let's try and clear some things up. I spoke to the Shadow Energy Secretary a little earlier. Claire Coutinho, what's your response to the banning of Maccabi Tel Aviv fans from Villa game next month?
I think it's a disgrace. I think the message that is being sent to Jewish people in this country is that they're not welcome here. And I think you have to look at it in context. What's happened is in the last few weeks, we saw 2 Jewish people being murdered at a synagogue simply for being Jewish. That's not happened in this country for hundreds and hundreds of years. This has always been a safe haven for Jewish people. And I think to say that we could not possibly police Israeli Jewish fans to watch a football match safely is reinforcing that message that Jews are not welcome here. And I think that is wrong.
Ed Miliband told me this morning that they are working towards an outcome. Your party, I suppose, has always gone with the line that you shouldn't interfere in operational policing matters. What should the stance of politicians be here?
Well, firstly, there were moments, for example, James Cleverly overruled the Home Office to make sure that we could fund the safety of Jewish synagogues through the CST. So we have stepped in and done that politically in the past. And on this particular issue, considering what has happened in this country and the sentiment of Jewish people feeling like they are not welcome, then yes, I do think politicians should have been involved.
Do you think that the Home Secretary, or indeed Prime Minister somehow got involved, should be saying to the police, doesn't really matter, reverse this?
I do, because actually what you've seen is policing in this country has been able to protect people at the Notting Hill Carnival, where people are routinely injured. It's protected people through the Palestinian marches. And like I said, if you look at the context, I think it's really important that they do this. And the question that I would ask is, if this was known in the Home Office, why was it not dealt with before? And actually what we've seen from Labour on this and, for example, the China spy scandal, which I'm sure you'll talk about this morning, is that they have waited until after the facts to look like they're dealing with anything. And that is the problem. They are politicians. They should get involved. And the thing that we need to do at the moment in this country is be very aware that we have sectarian politics on the rise and that there are people who are trying to create a sense that Jewish people are not welcome here, and we should stand against that.
The petition that called for the banning or relocation of this match specifically referred to the Aston area where the match would be played, being, and I'm quoting here, diverse, predominantly Muslim. Does a suggestion that the match shouldn't take place in this area for that reason bother you?
Yes. And I think politicians need to have the courage to name some of the problems that this country is facing. And one of those problems is political Islam. Now, that's not to say the moderate Muslim community are a problem in Britain, but we have seen in the past extremist Islamism, and now is a problem in Britain. And now we are seeing a movement of people, last election, 5 MPs elected, simply on sectarian politics. That may be higher at the next election. So we have to grip this. And part of that is dealing with rising anti-Semitism, but part of that is dealing with integration.
What are you saying about those 5 MPs? Are you saying that you think those people shouldn't be in Parliament? They got elected. People voted for them.
But the question is why, Trevor? If you look at that manifesto, it was purely about foreign conflicts and issues that only spoke to the Muslim community. And if the people in this country are being elected on manifestos like that, there was nothing about defence, there was nothing about the wider economy of the nation, then you have to say integration is a problem and we must grip it.
Are you echoing your colleague Robert Jenrick's view about Handsworth here?
So I can't comment on that particular area because I wasn't there. But,
why not?
But I definitely will say there are parts of this country which are not properly integrated and we should worry about that. And you can see what has happened in this case. The politicians that were elected to represent those constituents petitioned them to say that Israeli Jewish fans should not be welcome here. That is the result of having sectarian politics. It is not the British way, and we need to grip it.
Let's talk about your particular area of responsibility. Mr. Miliband announces this morning that they're going to create 400,000 clean energy jobs, and he was careful to make the distinction between green jobs in general and clean energy jobs specifically. You must be happy with that.
Well, look, anything that trains young people, of course I'm for. But firstly, I would question, what are those jobs? We've seen at the moment when people talk about green jobs, the vast majority of them are not in clean energy. And actually, I think in this case, he's going to include welders and electricians and plumbers, which we need in the economy anyway. So I'm all for jobs. That's a good thing. But the question that I have for Ed is, what is he doing to the wider economy overall? His plans are to sign up to the highest offshore wind prices that we've seen in a decade, far higher than the current cost of electricity, making energy incredibly expensive in this country for the long term. That will have as a net result less jobs overall.
Sticking with jobs, one of the things that I talked to him about is the fact that the jobs that you mentioned are all on the shortage list. That is to say that employers can bring people from abroad because we have a shortage of these people. Well, of course, we can train people up, but that will take time. If you were in government, would you take those jobs off the shortage list to force employers to employ British people to do these jobs?
Well, we've said we've got to massively reduce migration, which would mean that you would have to change some of the shortage list visa exemptions. And I do think there should be a greater focus on training people. And I think it has been an easy lever for business to bring people over. And, you go to some of these areas and, for example, areas that we're going to build nuclear power plants, you're going to need welders, you're going to need electricians. I did a £600 million package for skills just in those areas because actually I think it's really important that British people can benefit from those jobs.
One other area which has been very much in the news this week is our relationship with China. Obviously, we don't want to get into some of the murkier element of this, but there's a continuing question about what role China should play in the UK infrastructure. Now, wind turbines, cables, all the kinds of networks that would have to be done to create this green economy. What part can China play in that? Or would you close the door to Chinese investment in critical UK infrastructure?
So we need to be very careful. It's something that I talked about when I was Energy Secretary. Europe has just weaned itself off Russian oil and gas, and now it's making itself dependent on Chinese critical minerals. And we need to be very clear-eyed about that. We cannot have a reliance on our energy system for products that can only be made in China. So some of that is to look at the supply chain, but there's also to look at which types of energy build that reliance on China. We know that, for example, wind and solar panels are much more reliant than, say, nuclear power, which is one of the reasons that I've been such a big proponent of nuclear, is because it gives us energy security because we can control the supply chain.
Just very quickly, by the way, there's one other thing I want to ask you about, but just on net zero. Have you abandoned the goal of net zero?
So we've said we would repeal the climate change target, and actually we think the net zero targets are a problem, and that's for three reasons. One, it's making the cost of electricity incredibly expensive, and two, we're seeing jobs move from this country to countries abroad. That's actually worsening climate emissions. Every time a business leaves here for a country powered by coal, you're worsening climate emissions. And so we don't think it's doing what it says on the tin. The net zero targets at this point are not helping climate change, the economy, or cost of living for households.
And is there another reason for this, which is that Reform are against it?
Well, if you look at what I did when I was in government, I started a net zero reset. I said we need to be honest about costs. If you look at Kemi Badenoch, our leader, she was one of two people in Parliament who spoke up when the legislation was passed and said, I'm worried about costs.
Yeah, but
what you're seeing
But
is...
you hadn't abandoned the net zero target.
So you might argue we hadn't gone far enough, but what we did at the time was incredibly controversial. And I can say that because I was being sued by multiple climate change activists at the time. So this is the continuing of beliefs that both me and my leader have held, because we are worried about cost of living in this country. I personally am incredibly worried about the fact that we've got the highest electricity bills in the world, and we need to focus on bringing them down.
Claire Coutinho, thank you for your time this morning. Listening to that was our panel, Gerard Baker, Carolyn Quinn and Stephen Bush. Jerry, you are in the land of no to net zero. What did you make of what Claire had to say?
I just think I think a lot of what she said was sensible, but sadly, of course, as you kept pointing out, that isn't really what the Tories did when they were in government. There's an unreality about the energy debate in this country, I have to say, as someone who is British but comes here, but lives in America. Britain has a significant energy problem. Britain's significant energy problem is not the amount of carbon that Britain is putting into the atmosphere. Britain could stop putting any carbon into the atmosphere tomorrow, and it wouldn't make a whit of difference to climate change. Britain could go back to the Stone Age, and it wouldn't make any difference to climate change. The energy challenge Britain has is that it has energy costs that are higher than almost any other industrialised country in the world, way higher than the United States, on some measures 3 to 4 times as high as the United States, significantly higher than the rest of the European Union. It desperately needs to improve energy supply, increase energy supply, and it should be bending all government policy towards doing that, not towards this, frankly, sort of obsessive focus on this idea, which is, increasingly discredited, that Britain can have any impact. It's particularly important, Trevor, because the particular industry of the future that's really going to power the economy is, of course, artificial intelligence, and we're seeing that. We're seeing massive productivity gains in the United States as a result of AI. To some extent, they're coming here too. They are going to require, we know, that requires a significant amount of energy, and one of the reasons America has been so successful at this is because it has plentiful, cheap energy. To power these data centres, this kind of energy is an absolute must. That should be where the government's focus is, generating energy, getting energy supply increased, reducing energy costs. That would boost the UK economy in a dramatic way, by the way, and give Britain even more resources to deal with some of the issues of carbon emissions that it want to deal with.
Just to be clear, the reason you say that it wouldn't make that much difference if we reduce our emissions to net zero is because you think the big players there are China and India and the United States. Yeah, China.
I say the UK could literally stop emitting carbon tomorrow for the rest of the century, and it would make. But this is not some right-wing talking point. By any measure, it would make 0.0001% difference to what's happening to climate because of the scale of China and India in particular of what they're doing.
Stephen, are we talking about the wrong thing?
Well, look, the argument for the government's net zero target has not been that the United Kingdom is going to stop climate change with our relatively small contribution to carbon emissions. It's twofold. It's one, that the United Kingdom can model how other democracies can transition from being carbon emitters to net zero and retain power. That has been actually the most useful thing that the Conservatives did over 14 years, where, of course, we transitioned away from coal in a large way, but they were also able to be re-elected consistently while doing so. They did provide a useful blueprint for the rest of the world. The other argument, which I think is sort of based on a wing and a prayer, is the idea that if you do net zero faster than your rivals, then you get first mover advantage. Now, that I think doesn't hold up as well. There is a country with first mover advantage in the climate transition, and it's China, right? That's why they've made themselves the indispensable player in new nuclear, in new solar, and in new wind energy. So I think we have to be honest here that there isn't a free lunch for the United Kingdom, because we aren't the country that is going to be the place you have to do business with on clean energy.
Okay.
But also, the transition to net zero is all very well, and Ed Miliband is hailing that with these new jobs. But the unions like the GMB and Unite say that industrial strategy and that transition are just not joined up. And it's the speed of the transition. They're saying, don't cut off the oil refineries, don't cut off those workers working in Scotland or in Wales who are on the manufacturing side. Don't do it so quickly. Do it in a much more drawn-out, longer way so that it's a fairer transition and those jobs aren't lost. I wonder how the unions are responding to the creation of these new energy jobs and whether they feel that they will be jobs for their workers, or, as you were pointing out, will it just bring in more short-term jobs from people living outside the country?
Well, I can tell, just by the way, just as a matter of fact, because I know there'll be people shouting at the telly at the moment, the United Kingdom is responsible for a little less than 1% of global emissions, China for about a third. So that's the context. In response to your question, Carolyn, I can tell you, actually, that what Unite have been saying this morning is this is all very well, but actually... you're closing these refineries at Grangemouth and Lindsey Oil, which could produce green fuel, but you've decided to import it from elsewhere. And secondly, and I think an interesting point, which takes us on to the jobs point, that actually you close these facilities down, what happens is the people who have got the skills and engineering capabilities and so on basically stop working, and we lose that capability. This point about the transition is rather important, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I'm not suggesting that there are many forms of energy that can be developed. Renewables are certainly one of them, and I know Stephen said China's kind of has led the way in that. The United States has got significant renewable energy production too, and there's no reason why the UK shouldn't do it. But the priority should be on doing it in what is most cost efficient, and that means a full range of energy options, whether it is importing oil and natural gas, whether it is obviously nuclear, which I know is part of the government's program too, dramatically expanding that, whether it is developing further what remaining resources Britain has here, whether it could be through fracking and things like that. It's those, and honestly, the way to create jobs is to improve Britain's economic growth prospects, and to do that, you need to improve its productivity. That will get people into work far more than green energy programs. And Britain, that's the core. Everything should be addressed towards that particular challenge, which is Britain's failure to achieve any significant economic productivity growth over the last 20 years.
But also the big thought, obviously, behind the government's thinking here is bringing the public with them. And there are so many challenges, cost of living. People are saying, I can't put more energy efficiency into my home. I can't afford to do that. So these big thoughts are fine. But if you can't bring the public with you, that's a real problem, which is why Donald Trump presumably knows that he's onto a winner. If he says, we're not into that kind of thing, we won't make you pay for it.
Stephen, I pursued Ed Miliband a bit on the question of who's going to get the jobs. Were you persuaded by his confidence, let's put it that way, that actually the training and all the rest of it would be enough to make sure that we can both reduce reliance on migrant workers and increase opportunities for British workers?
Well, the government has made it much more expensive to hire from overseas, even if you're on the shortage occupation list, right? Which, so we should be clear here that the government has done, for good or for ill, an awful lot to decrease the incentives on business to hire from overseas. But there's a trade-off here between speed of doing this stuff and encouraging and actually hitting the various ambitious targets that the government has on green jobs, on housing, and encouraging people to take on apprenticeships. Where obviously, as you alluded to in your question, it takes some time to train a welder, whereas you can hire a trained welder by clicking your fingers, or at least you could before these various barriers were introduced to doing so. Now, I think the government probably has done enough to ensure that these jobs are going to go to British trained apprentices, but that is going to come at a cost of their ability to actually deliver any of these things over the course of the Parliament.
Okay. Next, one of Vladimir Putin's most prominent Russian opponents, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, on why the Foreign Office can't face up to the Kremlin. We'll bring you that sit-down after this.
I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories.
This is insane.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News, get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories.
This is insane.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News, Get the full story first.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling.
It's not his country, it's ours.
Sky News, the full story first, free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in.
Mikhail Khodorkovsky was once Russia's richest man. Now he's one of the Kremlin's biggest targets. After serving a decade in a Siberian prison on charges widely criticised as politically motivated, he now lives in exile as one of Vladimir Putin's most prominent critics. Just this week, Moscow charged him and 23 others with what they call terrorism, accusing them of plotting a coup, charges that he denies. I sat down with Mr. Khodorkovsky via a translator this weekend. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, you have some new charges against you. How serious are the charges? Let's say you decided to go back and you stood trial, you were convicted. How long would you be in jail for?
Well, these are not the only charges against me. There have been previous charges against me in the past. So a return to Russia would mean life imprisonment for me. What is not pleasant about these charges is that it could mean violence used against me outside Russia.
Do you fear for your safety here in London?
No. Well, of course, I feel much safer here than in a Russian jail. In the Russian jail where I spent 10 years and 2 months, that's where I was knifed at least once.
You were knifed?
Yes, I was sleeping and somebody struck me with a knife, trying to hit me in the eye. Fortunately, they missed. The knife luckily missed my eye.
Wow, okay. We still, of course, remember, though, the fate of Mr. Litvinenko, though. Presumably, you have some... You would have that at the back of your mind, surely?
No doubt. Particularly because I know his wife. We keep in touch and bump into each other quite often at different events.
What do you think of the position of the UK government?
The British government has been involved in an ongoing dialogue with the Russian opposition, but the level of that dialogue has not been very high. I have had several invitations to talk to the British Parliament, and we are trying to inform them, to provide them with the same amount of information about the situation in Russia that we have.
What would you like to hear from the new Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper?
Well, I think that Britain could play a much more important role, a much more considerable role, not just in terms of providing support to Ukraine, and of course Britain is already playing this role already, but by engaging more directly with the Russian opposition, because both of these things are two sides of the same coin. They are both levers of putting pressure on the Kremlin.
I want to come back to Ukraine in a moment, but when you say a more direct support for the Russian opposition, what would that look like in practice? Is it money? Is it what they say? Is it more sanctions? What would you like the British government to do for the Russian opposition now?
So we're not talking about money, we're talking about engagement. The United Kingdom is involved in certain steps vis-à-vis Russia, including sanctions, for example. And of course, the UK is playing a significant role in framing the position taken by Europe, although neither the UK nor Europe would recognise that openly.
Britain is doing things behind the scenes, is it?
It also has a certain role to play in the United States position. What Britain is lacking today is expert knowledge about Russia, which it possessed about 30 years ago. So in fact, playing such an important part in all of these issues, it would make sense for the United Kingdom to have a dialogue with people who have the knowledge and have the expertise and who are natural allies of the British government.
So are you saying that, for example, our Foreign Office at the moment lacks the capability, the expertise to play the part you would like it to play in opposing Putin?
Well, I would say that the Foreign Office representatives do come to our events and they do take notes. But you know very well that what the apparat know and what is taken on board by people at the highest level of government are quite different. And that is very well understood by the Kremlin. So when the Kremlin see a potential dialogue, this rattles them. It makes them uneasy.
How long has Mr. Putin got?
So Putin, in fact, like many dictators before him, he uses very cleverly the support in the lower circles of society in order to put pressure on the inner circle. So while he's quite healthy, he can carry on doing this quite effectively. But if he loses his grip on power, even for a second, he won't be able to go back to holding power, as he did as Prime Minister in 2008 and 2012, because it's a different time now.
So, all in all, though, underlying it, do you think that this is now an opportunity for the opposition?
Well, yes, because I think by putting psychological pressure on Putin, creating a set of problems for Putin that he has to resolve himself or be engaged in resolving himself, and the consolidation of the opposition is one of those problems, all this is actually an opportunity to put pressure on the pivotal point of this conflict. And the pivotal point is Putin himself.
Just a couple of last questions. We should talk about Ukraine. Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin are going to meet in Hungary.
Are you sure?
I only hear what I hear from Mr. Trump.
Well, yes, it's something I've heard from him as well.
Okay. If they meet, what would you expect to come out of that meeting? Do you think Putin is ready to make a deal?
I get the impression that Putin has sent Trump a signal that he is ready for a deal.
What would that deal look like?
Well, however absurd it might sound, we are talking about the Donbass, I think. Putin wants to get the whole of the Donbass, those parts of it that he hasn't occupied yet. I mean, it might not be such a stupid idea as simply getting several thousand square kilometers, which in fact means nothing for Russia, given its size. I think what he might actually be thinking of is this kind of deal would destabilize the situation in Ukraine. So really, it all depends on how Zelensky, Trump, and the European allies of Ukraine deal with this situation.
But you think a deal could be on?
I have already started getting doubts about understanding Putin and what he really wants. But I've never had any idea about what Trump is all about, and actually trying to understand him is never possible. So now you're asking me how I understand the interaction or interrelation between them, and that's quite beyond me.
Last question then. How do you feel when you saw Trump and Putin together in Alaska?
In my head, I could understand why Trump was doing this. But in my heart, it was very difficult to accept.
And if, in the end, there is a deal and Putin survives, given what you've been through, how would you feel?
Well, for me, stopping this war against Ukraine, if Ukraine manages to preserve its sovereignty and also prevent the resumption of this conflict, that would be much more important than waiting a few years for Putin to leave the stage.
Michał Chodorkowski, thank you. Stick around, we'll discuss that interview with our panel in just a moment.
A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation futures.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Well, back to our panel. Jerry, one of the interesting things that Khodorkovsky said was basically didn't think much of the Foreign Office.
Right. Yeah, it was. I thought that was very interesting that he said Britain lacks the expertise in Russia that it used to have, certainly in the Cold War and the immediate post-Cold War period. And that is I don't know. I'm not familiar with the details of British intelligence and what Britain's diplomatic operation is like. But that's an important point if it's true. Russia is really good. It's not very good at many things, Russia. It's got a terrible economy, it's got terrible demographics, it's a horrible political society. It's really good at messing around in other countries. Very, very effective at doing it. Whether it is in, with cyber attacks, whether it is through manipulation of political debates, which we've seen here and in the United States, whether it is direct action, as we saw in Salisbury or with Litvinenko and that kind of stuff. I'm sure we are doing lots of things in Russia that would undermine and destabilise Putin in the way that he's trying to undermine and destabilise our societies. But we don't seem to be very good at it. I mean, he seems to be much better at that. And look, it's a closed society. It's an authoritarian society. It's very, very hard, obviously, to really develop the opposition there. What Khodorkovsky was talking about was, working with the opposition, and again, I'm assuming we do that. But if we really aren't doing enough because we lack the expertise or the resources, that seems to me important. And actually, both the United States and the United Kingdom, and indeed our allies in Europe, could be doing, if there is an opportunity for us to do much more there, it's not going to yield Putin's collapse tomorrow, but ways in which we could be further undermining Putin, I think, are very important, and if we're not doing enough of them, we should be doing more.
Stephen, did that surprise you?
Not particularly, to be honest. I mean, it's a frequent complaint you hear from officials within the Foreign Office is still, despite the fact that in 2006 they killed someone on British soil and they've done that again since, still, then if you want to get ahead in the intelligence world and indeed in the diplomacy world, then it is still the Middle Eastern jihad, and it's this sexy posting. It's the one that makes you, if you want to be seen as a rising star, that's still what they feel is rewarded internally, rather than understanding Russia, which is still seen as you've got China, which is the huge geopolitical challenge because they are the rising superpower. You've got Islamic fundamentalism because that's, the kind of, when we get to talk about terror and security. And there's still this feeling that Russia's kind of like fusty. That if you're a specialist in it, you're sort of stuck in the past a bit, even though we've had many, many signs that isn't true. So I'm not surprised to learn that attitude has also been made felt outside, then it's still seen as kind of the lesser track of the big challenges that the Foreign Office faces.
Well, of course, the great new thing in international relations is that there's only one thing that matters in international relations, and that is what does Donald Trump think and what is Donald Trump going to do. Here's a very interesting piece of survey work which was done in the United States about which president has done most for peace in the Middle East. And I suspect a year ago, or frankly 3 months ago, you probably would not have seen a result which puts Trump, more than double Obama, who's supposed, amongst peaceniks is thought to be the thing. Has Trump actually changed the way international relations happen, do you think,
He'll
Caroline?
be storing that away, won't he, in his Why I Should Get the Nobel Peace Prize
I was going to say,
next year file.
only one of those men has a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah, exactly. And look, he's on 16%, Obama, as opposed to Trump, 38%. Well, look, he is being praised for what he's done in the Middle East. There's no doubt about that. But what about the other conflicts? What about other areas? Donald Trump says, I don't like to see people dying. And look at what's happening in Ukraine. Civilian infrastructure is being pounded. Civilians are losing their lives in Ukraine night after night. And he still seems to be bound by President Putin somehow. After every phone call with President Putin, he seems to soften his stance. He's been strong, then he's softer. And all of that, delaying tactics by Putin, allow Putin to carry on the killing and the bombing, and in the meantime, no resolution to Ukraine. So the Middle East is fine, but there are plenty of other areas that Donald Trump, many people feel, should get much, much stronger.
Of course, I don't think that's fair, and I don't think that's true. And in fact, if anything, I think Trump, whatever one thinks about him, I think he does actually like the idea of being a peacemaker. I think he genuinely, he has been, of all American presidents, all of those, for example, he's the only one who really hasn't been enmeshed in a foreign war and got Americans involved in foreign wars. And it's partly, he's not remotely isolationist. He is very cautious about the use of force, and I think he genuinely does want peace, whether for the Nobel Peace Prize or because he believes in it. And I think, Karen, if I may say so, I think you're sort of missing the point on Ukraine, which is, he would argue, people would argue that the problem with Trump is that he wants peace so much that he's kind of prepared to overlook the underlying issue in Ukraine. What Trump wants to do, if he can, and when he goes to Budapest, if that happens, he'll try and persuade Putin again to sit down with Zelensky, and he'll try and get an end, a ceasefire, Well, you know, there are a lot of people who believe, both in America and in this country, and it's certainly in Ukraine, that that a ceasefire at all costs is no real peace at all. That actually it will leave Russia, you know, in charge of a significant amount of Ukraine. If it doesn't have the right security guarantees for Ukraine, in the event of in the post-ceasefire world, it won't be very meaningful. I think the worry with Trump is not that he's happily sitting back and letting Putin do whatever he wants, is that he's so desperate to get any kind of a deal, any kind of cessation of hostilities, that he will kind of sell Ukraine's interests down the river in order to achieve that peace.
Well, he may be desperate to do that.
The cynic would say that it's much easier to build a golf course when there's peace than when there's war.
There's no question there's business interests there too. But again, there are many things one can criticise Donald Trump for, but I actually think he genuinely does rather naively think that he can just sort of wave a wand and there will be peace.
My point is that the longer this goes on and the more advances that Russia makes, if we are talking about ending this along certain lines, President Putin can carry on pushing and delaying until he's taken more and more of Ukraine territory. And that is the question. You know, 1 minute Donald Trump seems to say Zelensky can claim back all of Ukrainian territory. And then the next time we hear from him, he says, let's draw this up along the current lines of battle. So there's a lot of confusion there. And for President Zelensky, the frustration and the exhaustion must be extreme.
OK, let's pay some bills. It's 38 days until the budget. We'll discuss what's at stake with our panel next.
Go ahead, back white jacket.
Deborah Haynes from Sky News. He called you Daddy earlier.
No, he did it very affectionately. Daddy, you're my daddy. Thank you.
Leicester is on its knees.
They've ripped the soul out of my factory and there's nothing left.
It is eerily quiet.
It's constantly on the brink of capacity.
There's overcrowding. It's not a new thing.
It's rough.
There's nothing to hide. Why aren't international journalists allowed in?
Are you worried about escalation?
Of course I'm worried about escalation, which is why my focus is on de-escalation.
The region, I think, is on edge because they are anticipating a retaliation.
Iran retaliates for the US attacks.
Founding principle of the alliance, that an attack on one is an attack on all.
Could Putin attack another NATO country within 5 years?
Those vivid colours of summer have faded now, but the trauma for everyone who witnessed what happened here hasn't gone away.
Devastation. We lost 3 of them.
Ruda Cabana's guilty pleas mean they won't have to relive what they saw in court, but everyone here tells you they'll carry it for the rest of their lives. You see people running red lights time after time after time. This is an offence that sometimes has the most awful of consequences.
When you speed through a pedestrian crossing, there is a risk that you could batter somebody to death. She filled our lives with light. She was innocent, she was happy.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
He had a beautiful death. He fell asleep in my arms. This is about a dying person's choice to die peacefully when they want to, on their terms.
Gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live.
Joins us live.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories.
This is insane.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Well, back to our panel. Stephen, November 26th, Rachel Reeves' budget. What are you hearing? Do we have any idea what direction they're going in?
Well, there's a lively debate on this still in government, right? Which is the OBR is going to downgrade its productivity forecasts, which will increase the size of the gap against Rachel Reeves' fiscal rule, which is for the day-to-day budget to be in balance by 29, where she had only 9 billion of headroom. So any deterioration in the, I know 9 billion is a huge amount of money to all of us, but in terms of government spending, which is more than $1 trillion, it's a rounding error. So there's an argument in the government which you go like, look, we can't have another year like this first one where we were being buffeted by individual forecasts. We need to go very big on both taxes and spending restraint, so you have a decent amount of headroom. You end up with something closer to 30, 40 against your rule. And then that sends an important signal about our ability to pay down our debt, which would help our debt servicing costs, which would help a bunch of other things. You then have some people who go, well, that looks like that'll be very politically painful and the parliamentary party's already very upset with us, so let's just have let's just get back to 9 billion. My read from what I'm hearing is that the let's actually go big and get a decent amount of headroom side is currently in the ascendant, but it's never certain in this government because there isn't really that big picture political project coming from the Prime Minister and the centre, which means that it's very easy for them to get buffeted off by, oh, that's politically difficult, that's politically easy. And then in addition to that, there's a debate about, OK, well, if you do want to improve your headroom, how are you going to do that on tax? Are you going to do that by breaking some of those promises on the main rates, which are obviously much easier and much more predictable? And broadly speaking, you could increase basic rate and that would be politically painful, but we know it wouldn't have an adverse economic effect. Or do you try and have a bunch of novel taxes, experiment with more wealth taxes as they had in the last budget, when they increased capital gains tax, they filled it with agricultural property relief, which is why we had all of the tractors coming out to protest on the streets here in Westminster. And so there's a live debate about basically, how much do you raise and what do you use to raise that revenue?
Well, look, there are two ways in which they can close that gap, as you've been saying. One is taxes. The other is they can attack spending. Let's do that in reverse order. Welfare and pensions are the big ticket.
Yeah.
Carolyn, you're already shaking your head.
Well, absolutely. I mean, welfare, as we know, so many people signing on for benefits every day. The government has already tried to cut welfare, and the argument was that they made the wrong reasons for it at the time, saying that it was cost-cutting rather than reform of the system. But nevertheless, it seems to be that there will be some move back towards restricting eligibility to benefits like Motability, for instance, which indeed Kemi Badenoch had already raised in her speech, and now we read that Rachel Reeves is considering that. So there will have to be...
They're talking about getting $1 billion out of that, aren't they?
Exactly. There will have to be cutbacks in spending as well as tax. But it's interesting, the whole idea of do you go for a big tax change and argue that it's good for the country to do one big move, as we saw back in 2001 or in 2010, a big tax reform, rather than salami slicing. Maybe get the pain over now, because as you get closer to an election, it's going to become much, much more difficult. And of course, the government has faced so much criticism for not having made the big decisions last year, tinkering with the system, small changes. They should have done something big, and maybe income tax is the way to go.
Do you think they're softening us up for an income tax hit?
I mean, it sounds like it. I'm not as familiar with. I defer to Stephen and Carolyn on their much superior knowledge of what the government is thinking about in detail and what it may do. The big economic picture, though, Trevor, is very clear, which is that the UK has chronically poor growth. It has now a really significant fiscal challenge. Raising taxes to meet the fiscal challenge is obviously an option. It is, however, going to be a very costly option because although, Stephen says it won't significantly affect growth, there will be some effect on growth. Of course, there will be from public spending cuts too. What they have to do is that they have to hope that addressing the fiscal challenge by raising taxes and presumably by cutting some spending is going to inject a level of confidence that the markets currently don't really have, not just in the UK, to be fair, but in pretty well any major government right now about their fiscal position, because these positions are not sustainable, and that will buy them some, not only just some general feeling of goodwill, but that interest rates may come down because Britain has been seeing a very significant increase in long-term interest rates, which are its debt, essentially what the government pays for its debt. That addressing there is, she must be hoping there's a kind of magic formula whereby the fiscal squeeze on the economy is big enough that it satisfies the markets, it encourages the markets to say, great, okay, we're happy now to buy more government debt, without being so great that it causes so much damage to the economy that it actually raises more questions about the sustainability of the UK economy in the long run. That's a really difficult path to tread.
There's an awful lot of potential tinkering here, which is what they did before, which Gordon Brown was notorious for, which doesn't necessarily deliver much. Is there a big single thing they can do? I'm going to set aside my own personal obsession, which is get rid of the triple lock.
I was going to mention the triple lock. It's in the conversation again, isn't it? And it's so difficult for them because they know that when they went for the winter fuel allowance last time, the pensioners revolted. But it seems to be a different issue with triple lock. I think there's more understanding of why the triple lock needs reform rather than the absolute taking away of winter fuel allowance.
I don't know. I think if you as a government were unable to land the argument that Paul McCartney should not get £200, no questions asked, every winter, you are not going to be able to land the argument on the triple lock, right? Because that goes to... Now ultimately, the United Kingdom is in a weird position, and its fiscal position, for all of the reasons Gerald set out, is very difficult. But actually, the solutions are fairly easy, right? You can increase basic rate. If you really want to tackle welfare spend, you do have to be willing to tackle pensioner spend. You do have to be willing to tackle the triple lock. But if you went to an earnings lock, then suddenly you've tackled quite a lot of that. The issue is these are all politically difficult, right? But they're not. The policy challenge is not hard. It's just we have two parties which are in denial about it. Well, three parties now which are in denial about it.
We will continue talking about this for the next month and a bit. But that's all we've got for you this Sunday. We'll be back next week. Darren on the Politics Hub all week at 7 o'clock.